We're at White Hart Lane, home of Tottenham Hotspur, one of England's most successful clubs. Spurs have appeared in the FA Cup final 9 times, winning the trophy 8. The first time was in 1901, when they were still members of the Southern League. They remain the only non-league club to win the FA Cup since the formation of the Football League in 1888. In the 1960-61 season, they became the first club in the 20th century to achieve the League and FA Cup double. Spurs were the first British club to win a UEFA club competition, the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1963. They were also the inaugural winners of the UEFA Cup in 1972, becoming the first British club to win 2 different major European trophies. A whole galaxy of stars has played for Spurs. The legendary Jimmy Greaves scored a club record 266 goals in 379 matches in the seasons between 1961 and 1970, a record that's never been beaten. His total of 357 goals makes him the highest goal scorer in the history of English top-flight football. Midfielder Steve Perryman, another club icon, made a club record 854 first-team appearances between 1969 and 1986. And then there's Glenn Hoddle, considered one of the most gifted footballers of his generation. He made 490 appearances between 1975 and 1987, scoring 110 goals, while for England he played 53 games and became their manager in the late 90s. Here under this lamppost, one day in August 1882, Tottenham Hotspur Football Club was born. A dozen youngsters, all in their early teens, met here at the junction of Tottenham High Road and Park Lane to discuss the formation of a football club. They already existed as a cricket club called Hotspur Cricket Club, named after Harry Hotspur, who was famed for his exploits in battle and immortalised by Shakespeare. They felt that cricket was such a great game, they wanted to stay fit for the following season by playing football in the winter months. And so they decided to call themselves Hotspur Football Club. A month later, they were ready to play their first match. Not far away was the River Lee, which created the Tottenham Marshes, on which they found ample space on which to play. Their first match here on the Marshes was a 2-0 defeat to a local side called Radicals. Shortly after, they were thrashed 8-1 by a side called Latimer. Now, these defeats didn't in any way dampen their enthusiasm, but something else did. Before each match, they would carefully get the pitch ready, mark it out, only to find that older boys would kick them off and take over the pitch for themselves. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, other youths who roamed the marshes looking for trouble would stand on the touchline hurling abuse at them. Many of them lost heart and decided to leave the club, and it looked very much as if the club was going to fold. Many of the boys attended a Bible class here at All Hallows Church. In the summer of 1883, they turned to their Bible class teacher, John Ripsher, for help. He was like a father to them, and they had great love and respect for him. Ripsher not only ensured that they could play on their pitches, but he also organised them into a proper club with a proper committee, and he himself was elected president and treasurer. This was their headquarters. It was the YMCA building at the time. Ripsher was a member of the council of the YMCA, and he arranged for this building to be used as their base. They had their committee meetings here, and they also played football in the basement. Now, unfortunately, these boys were not very well behaved. They continually broke all the rules of the YMCA. They played cards, they stole berries from the mulberry bushes, and above all, they made a terrible din when they were playing football. In the end, they were expelled from these premises. But despite being let down and embarrassed by those boys, Ripsher stuck with them. Now that was a remarkable thing to do in Victorian times because his reputation would have suffered by his continued association with young hooligans. But Ripsher was a devout Christian. He showed these boys the unconditional love of Jesus, who accepted people just as they were. Ripsher went to the vicar of All Hallows Church, the Reverend Alexander Wilson, and asked if the boys could use a building owned by the church as their new headquarters. Well, obviously, Wilson must have had some doubts because of the boys' reputation, but he agreed on condition that they would attend a service here at All Hallows each Wednesday evening. They agreed to this and everything went ahead. And it looked as if this would be the beginning of a happy story. But unfortunately, after only 2 years, the boys let themselves down again, and Ripsher too. Wilson saw some of them playing cards in a pew at the back of the church. That was it. They were once again expelled from their headquarters and had to look for a new base. Ripsher did not abandon them. He found a new base for them at the Red House Coffee Palace adjacent to Spurs' present White Hart Lane ground. The building is still in the club's hands and is used as offices. There's no doubt that Tottenham Hotspur Football Club wouldn't exist today if John Ripsher hadn't stood by those boys when he did. Despite their problems off the pitch, Spurs made incredible progress on it under Ripsher's leadership. In fact, so strong were the foundations he laid that in 1901, less than 20 years after the club had been formed, they were winners of the FA Cup. Well, Ripsher himself in 1894 decided to step down as president, although he did continue his association with the club as a patron. He left an incredible legacy. 6 of the boys who were with him from the very beginning became members of the management committee in 1895 when the club turned professional. And 3 years later, when they became a limited company, 2 of those boys became directors. But it wasn't just those sorts of foundations he laid that are his legacy. It was something else. Under his leadership, Spurs acquired the reputation of being the most popular club in England for their fair play. Quite simply, if you cheated, if you were dirty, you couldn't get into the Spurs team. In 1948, Fred Ward wrote a history of the club, and he looks back on Ripsher's contribution and writes this: "Let us pause a while here and think of what that excellent Mr. Ripsher did. He started a tradition at the Hotspur Club which has been maintained up to the present day, for in my opinion, Tottenham Hotspur Football Club have done much to perpetuate the best possible spirit in the playing of professional football." Ripsher had well and truly left his mark on the club, but what became of the great man after standing down as president? His trail led me here to Dover. What was the clue that brought me here then? Well, it was an extract I found in the 1908 history of Tottenham Hotspur, written by 2 of Ripsher's earliest players. Mr. Ripsher was our president and true friend. He was with us, wet or fine, year in and year out, every night until 10 o'clock. He was the real father and founder of the Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, and without him, there would be no Hotspur Club today. It came as a great shock to us to learn that he's now living at Dover in humble circumstances and totally blind. And that was the last the club ever heard of him. My investigations revealed that he never married and left London in the late 1890s to live with his sister and her family in the Diamond Hotel. His brother-in-law was the proprietor. Sadly, by 1906, the hotel's business had collapsed and the family was reduced to poverty. It had a devastating effect on Ripsher's health. The strain was simply too much for him. He was admitted to the workhouse in Dover. It's now the Buckland Hospital. It shows the extent to which the family's fortunes had plummeted, that the workhouse provided free medical care for the poor and destitute of the town. Ripsher was admitted there in January 1906 and stayed until September of that year. However, his health continued to deteriorate and he was readmitted the following March. This time, he was never to leave. He died there on the 24th of September 1907, aged 67. He was buried 4 days later in an unmarked pauper's grave here in St Mary's Cemetery in Dover. When the Tottenham Tribute Trust heard of his plight through my book Thank God for Football, they immediately responded by commissioning a headstone for him. It was dedicated on the centenary of his death, the 24th of September 2007. The ceremony was attended by officials of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club and many of their supporters who travelled long distances. They'd come to honour an exceptional man. John Ripsher had shown unconditional Christian love to undeserving youngsters at critical points in the club's history. Had he not done so, there would be no Tottenham Hotspur Football Club today.